I think about Closeout, it's sort of like starting with the end in sight. Many people believe that, and I asked the question in the PowerPoint, where do you start? Many people believe it's simply at the beginning, right? At the beginning, not at the beginning of Closeout, but at the beginning of the project. What is Project Closeout? So I'm gonna read some of this. I'm gonna read fast, and I'm gonna keep you awake. Project Closeout is a period of construction that provides the systematic transition of the project from construction team to the owner. Project Closeout can be as short as a week for a very small project or 2 years for large, more complex projects. Project Closeout is primarily defined and driven by substantial completion. Substantial completion can be largely explained as a two-phase process, pre-substantial completion and post-substantial completion, but all substantial completion. Substantial completion is the date of, the date of substantial completion is very critical to the closeout process, right? I'm sure we can all attest to that. The AIA, A201, defines substantial completion as when the progression of the work has reached a point where the building or the project or specific phases can be occupied and used for the purposes in which they were intended, right? That's the AIA terminology for substantial completion. And so I want to make sure many of you I know some of this, but I don't assume that everybody does. The closeout phase of a project or contract, in my experience over 31 years, can be the agony or ecstasy of your project experience. It's at this stage of the project or your contract when your management skills are fully tested. And that doesn't matter if you're on the design side or you're on any of the various construction points. Your management skills are fully tested. The project is nearing completion, right, at this point, and you're looking forward to moving on to the next big project. And many contractors and professional service firms or PSAs, or PSPs, should I say, are accustomed to looking to the end of the project, looking to the next project before this one is closed, right? I think we're all somewhat guilty of that. However, it says, do not start packing your suitcase just yet. There's much to be accomplished between now and the issuance of your contract final pay app. Whether you're the owner, again, architect, design consultant, CM contractor, prime contractor, lower tier, subcontractor, vendor, or supplier, there are many tasks that must be complete before the project can be officially closed out. And you have to know where you fit, right, in this very complicated maze, because we all fit, depending on our role, at a different point. As you see these folks, they appear to be happy. They crossed the finish line and nobody told them they got to go through closeout. I did a little research. I'm fairly known for that, and but I always like to at least state the sources before I give you the stats. So I was looking at the Bureau of Labor, the McKinsey Global Institute, the World Economic Forum, KPMG, which is a large industry entity that they do research on the global scale for design and construction, the Navigant Construction Forum, Project Analysis Group, and Sourceable. Some of the things, as I thought about closeout, I'm sort of backing up and looking at the industry from a global standpoint, right? The state of our industry, the future is bright. How many remember what it was like in 2008 when things tanked? And there were many projects that got canned. There were firms that went out of business. There were people who lost jobs. The entire market, particularly in St. Louis, I mean, we were in a state of flux. Now, I think we can all agree the future is bright. 13% of the world's GDP is due to design and construction. So when we think about how we actually, stand up and impact the world, this is how we impact the world. 13% of the GDP is due to the industry that we all live and breathe in every day. Construction is 14.7% of the global GDP, up from 12.4% in 2014. Let's see me jump down. Estimated 85% growth in the volume of construction output, right, is expected by 2030. I'm sort of setting this thing up, talk about how great and how vibrant our industry is. Over time and over budget is starting to appear to be a common theme in the industry for what I'm seeing. 1% reduction in construction cost could save society $100 billion. Just 1% reduction. And there's many people who wouldn't have a clue how to get that 1%. Over 50% of engineering and construction professionals report one or more underperforming projects in the previous year, right? So one of the things we tend to find out during the closeout phase is how much our project has actually underperformed. Many times during the progression of the work, we see glimpses of it. From busted budgets in certain schedule of value line items, use of contingency much earlier than it needs to be, use of contingency for items outside of owner directs or unforeseen items. Those things tend to plague us in the closeout. So the A&Es talk about the underperforming projects. 69% of owners say poor contractor performance is the single biggest reason for project underperformance. 25% of projects came in within 10%, I need to change glasses, within 10% of their original deadline in the past 3 years. And only 31% of all projects came within 10% of the budget in the past 3 years. Large projects typically take 20% longer to finish than scheduled and are up to 80% over budget. 98% of mega projects become delayed or over budget. 77% of mega projects are around the globe are 40% or more behind schedule. So what that's telling us is, number one, how difficult these projects can be. The large projects and the mega projects. And they're not for the faint at heart, right? They're not for the weak. We sit and sometimes we discuss issues in our OAC meeting, and what is evident sometimes is that these large projects on the front end, they're very glamorous. They can be very glamorous, right? I heard once a gentleman from Alberici 20 years ago, Ron Weesey, said, never fall in love with a project, right? And what I generally say is just don't get caught up in the hype, right? Because these projects are large, they may represent something that could take your firm from here to here in a matter of months or a few years. But one thing you must always understand is don't fall in love with the project or get caught up in that hype. Moving on. Scope of work changes. Scope of work changes. Those things impact closeout as well. Before you even get to defining the actual process of closeout, you deal with these issues during the progression of the work. 25% of all projects grow past their scope of work in the field by over 30%. There's an average of 35% of all construction projects will have a major change. It's normal. Up to 30% of initial data created during design and construction phase is lost by the closeout. 80% of owners feel they need more collaboration from their project team. More collaboration from the project team. 78% of engineering and construction companies believe that project risks are increasing. Right? They're increasing, right? We're becoming more averse to the risk, right? So how do we write our scopes? How do we negotiate so that we have less risk and the person beside us or the person under us carries that risk for us, right? It's not something that is widely talked about or admitted. Rework. How many of us have gotten to the end of a project and one of the big issues you dealt with was rework? Around 30% of all work performed by construction companies is actually rework. Up to 70% of total rework experienced in construction is a result of design-induced rework. So everybody has some skin in this game. Roughly 4 to 6% of total project cost is median cost of rework, but only taking into account consideration direct costs and reported rework. Right? It's estimated that $4.2 billion a year in the U.S. is considered cost of rework, caused by poor document controls and management. That gets back to people, right? How many have heard the saying, companies don't build projects, people do? Anybody ever heard that? Companies don't build projects, people do. You get the wrong team on a project and I'll show you some fireworks. So where do you start? Right? Where do you start? It seems to be the easiest question in the world to answer. Where do you start when you think about closeout? Right? Should you have actually agreed to be on the project? You're at the end of the project now. But should you have actually been on that project? If you take a look at the things that you're dealing with, and I got a list of them, and I don't have time to go through them because of the things that I see every day, but I asked that question, should they have been on the project? And it has absolutely nothing to do with the diversity, nothing. It's just, how are we preparing ourselves for the opportunities? Regardless of if we're on the professional service design side, we're on the trade subcontractor, we're a super sub to the CM, or if we are the CM. Front-end communication, clarity and scope, schedule, change management. What are the rules of engagement to be on the project? Payment terms. And most importantly, I took a class almost 30 years ago, and the gentleman walked in and he wrote on the board, "What does your paper say?" And it took me, well, I never got it until he explained it, but I didn't understand what he meant. What does your paper say? But when he finished that class, I understood he was talking about the contract. He was talking about the contract. And many of us do not know what our paper says. Periodic review of our contract terms and provisions, right? Which ones may or may not have greater impacts, right? Once you sign the contract, it doesn't necessarily mean you put it in the drawer and you never pull it back out again. And you don't necessarily pull it out when you have a problem, right? You want to always be versed certain aspects of that contract, because things get passed down to you. Most of the folks that we deal with, that I deal with, are lower tier. So there are things that just flow down naturally to them. And we don't always understand what those flow down provisions are and how they can hurt us. So it's important that we know what our scope is, know what they're buying from us, not what they implied they're buying from us. Ongoing documentation during the progression of the work, right? Mark up your record documents. Many of us have never been in a situation we don't know what record documents are and how they're used. Varying field conditions against what's actually on the drawing packages. Impacts from other subs or other consultants, right? Or our prime. You know, do you have a photo catalog, right? Closeout is not the time to go back and try to take photos when you had issues doing rough end. Now, I know that's kind of funny, but I've seen that, right? When you go and take photos in the field, right, make sure there's a date stamp and you put a caption on the photo. Because then when it gets to a guy like Philip Lee who's trying to understand what it is you're asking for, he can't interpret that just from a photograph. It may not even be this project, right? Simple. It seems simple, you know, but it's not that simple. As project managers, right, we're not the contractor, but we have to understand in the same vein how to manage closeout from the beginning of your job. Many project managers have issues at closeout. Even though they're not the contractor, they can't seem to get all of the documentation from the contractors. And there's just a lot of delays and things that occur. You need to go back and understand how you communicated certain things on the front end of the project, whether that's pre-bid, pre-proposal time, pre-construction time, doing the weekly, if you have OAC meetings, which you have weekly construction team meetings, you know, how are you communicating these things? So the Project Management Institute said when it comes to ensuring you're the best chance of success with your construction project, nothing matters more than communication. I did, and if you look through that list of sessions we did, I did an entire presentation on communication. A study conducted by the PMI uncovered that effective communication with all stakeholders is the most crucial factor in project management. If you ask 10 project managers, you might get 10 different answers. What's the most crucial part of project management? I would never see all 10 say communication. Everybody will say something different: cost, budget, you know, schedule, things like that. But in my mind, the way I approach it is communication, because if I could handle the communication aspect of it, everything else falls like dominoes. Communication is the key to a successful project experience and a predictable closeout, right? How many would always want to be in a position to predict how their closeout is going to go? How many would want to be in that position if you could predict it? There's certain things that you can do along the way that will allow you to actually predict it and for it to actually come true. Where to communicate, what to communicate, when to communicate, and how to communicate. One of the biggest deficiencies that I see in the industry is still communication. Right? Not just the verbal communication. I'm going to go one step further and say an even bigger deficiency that I see in the industry is writing. First of all, writing skills aren't there. Maybe they aren't teaching us as well in college about technical writing. Maybe some companies internally don't focus as much on training their project managers in terms of technical writing, right? But that is something that I just continue to see, just how you lay it out. How do you make a point? And I think I say something. Oh, I got a 10-minute break here. Let me see. Let me hit this one real quick. I think this effective communication equals successful project outcomes, right? So I'm just talking about writing, and I think I may mention something in here. Effective communication is vital to the successful completion of any construction project. Good communication can improve teamwork and lead to better project collaboration. Poor communication not just can, but it will result in misunderstandings, delays. That should be all caps. Delays and issues down the road, right? I always say, in order to avoid a misunderstanding, always get an understanding. In order to avoid a misunderstanding, always get an understanding. And it doesn't matter if we're in the industry 1 year or 31 years. Maybe I'm telling my age when I say that. But always get that understanding. Communication is simply the exchange of information in order to convey a message. Simply the exchange of information in order to convey a message. Good communication involves being able to transmit your message so that it is received and understood by the intended recipients.